Good evening, everyone. I am Elizabeth Goldstein. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our third and final session in a series of our programming on 2020 Masterworks Awards. Before we get started, here are a few things to note. Using the chat function, here are some things. You can comment and interact with each other and enter questions for our panelists who will take time towards the end to respond. The MAS team has also posted additional tips into the chat for using Demio. Our program tonight will run about 1 hour and is being recorded. A recording will be available later on our YouTube channel and Facebook pages, where you can also view the past programs as part of this series and others. As a reminder, tonight's program offers 1 free CM credit to AICP members. The Masterworks Awards recognize projects that exemplify excellence in architecture and design in the previous calendar year. As we all know, this year is unlike any other. The past 7 months have presented an inflection point to think deeply and differently about the built environment. What role does design play in our civic life and bettering it? This series will examine that very question, focusing tonight on how design supports tourism and commerce. These awards could not be possible without our amazing jury members who dedicated their time and expertise to selecting our 2020 award winner honorees. Sarah Carroll, Chair of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. Susan Chin, Principal Design Connects. Andrew Kogan, Chairman and CEO of Knoll Incorporated. Avinash Rajagopal, Editor-in-Chief of Metropolis Magazine, and Richard Olcott, who is a member of the MAS Board of Directors, Chair of the MAS Preservation Committee, and Design Partner at INEAD Architects. He is also moderating our session this evening. I would also like to thank our Masterwork sponsors: AYON Studio Architecture and Preservation, Mary B. Dierickx, Historic Preservation, Platt, Byard, Dovell, White Architects, especially in memory of Charles Platt, Mathews, Nielsen, Landscape Architects, Bone, Levine Architects, and Reddymade Architecture and Design. I'm delighted that shortly we will be learning more about 2 of our 2020 Masterworks winners. And to introduce them, it is now my enormous pleasure and honor to welcome Richard Olcott, who, in addition to the many titles I've just listed earlier, is also our 2009 Masterworks Award winner for Best Building for the Standard Hotel. Over the last 4 decades, Richard has developed an award-winning body of work for leading cultural, civic, and educational institutions. His work is grounded in the power of architecture as an interpretive medium, one that can communicate complexities of contemporary society and create lasting cultural impact. He has created bespoke buildings that are rooted in context, expressive of their missions, and recognized for excellent design. Now, Richard, over to you. I leave things in your capable hands. Let's get started.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome everyone. As Elizabeth mentioned, this evening we're going to be talking about the role of design in tourism and commerce. Both of these projects have a great deal to do. They operate in the public realm. And first, I just wanted to share with you, since we were honored, I guess 11 years ago now, to win this same award for Best New Building for the Standard Hotel on the High Line. The design partner in my office, Todd Schliemann, was the mastermind of this project, the client, Andre Balaz. And this building, there are many similarities here, but I think it's fair to say it engages the city on a whole nother level in a very different way. It is probably the only, I think still the only building that actually straddles the High Line. I don't know how our client ever got away with that, but it makes it for an incredible urban condition in which the building actually stands over the High Line, next to the High Line, and under the High Line. And literally embraces it in every way. It generates a series of reciprocal relationships in which all the people in the hotel are looking at the High Line, and all the people on the High Line are looking at the hotel. I think if this, it's fair to say, if you're looking for a private place that's quiet, this is not the hotel for you. And you can see, you know, how it literally engages the public and is really out there and making a great statement in the public realm. Here's one of the plaza that in the winter becomes a skating rink down below, and then you can see here people looking out, people looking in, and then it also becomes a giant kind of billboard at times. It's been rented by companies like Target to advertise by using the lights in a kind of Hollywood Squares way. It's a very engaging, literally engaging project. So that's more of what we're about to see shortly. And so first I thought if we could just go to our first 2020 winner. This is we're going to hear about the Essex Market project. This project is actually designed by Shop Architects, and it won the award for Best Urban Amenity. And I can tell you, since I was on the jury, we were all very impressed in how this completely reinvents the whole idea of the Essex Market, which dated from, I think, 1888 when it was originally outside, and then became inside in 1940. It is a completely stunning update to that previous location, which was across the street. It uses materials in an interesting way, in an industrial way, to kind of be reminiscent of its place on the Lower East Side. And it is part of a much larger master plan that I think you're going to hear about on various levels, on grade and below grade and above grade, with lots of visibility between the levels. It is going to be one of the largest marketplaces anywhere when it's finished next year. So to talk more about this, I'd like to introduce the principal from Shop Architects, Dana Getman. She has expertise in master plan projects like this and in the intersection of city building and community engagement. And she led the master plan for this project and also for other ones, including for the East River Waterfront Master Plan. And I can say some of her current work includes the Fulbright University plan in Vietnam, and the National Resource Center at Syracuse University, and also the building at 111, the tall building at 111 West 57th Street. Ms. Gettman is also a member of our MAS Planning Committee. So welcome. Dana, please.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Elizabeth and MAS for having me. I love this project, and it's also always a pleasure to speak about it. So the market is, we were talking about commerce, and I apologize if you hear sirens. I'm in my apartment in Brooklyn. This is really a hyper-local project. And just to give a quick context, we won the master plan for this as part of a team with BBB, who you also hear from next, and the Delancey Street Associates, an incredible development group. It actually ended up being around 2 million square feet of a mixed use development. And the heart of it really both, physically and programmatically is the Essex Market. So the sites themselves, there's 9 sites that were publicly owned that were cleared as part of 1950s urban renewal and really lay empty as, in what should be the heart of the Lower East Side, right at the intersection of Essex and Delancey Street, right on top of the F train and the J train. So it is a very connected site. So in 2008, before we were involved, the EDC did an incredible job, also working with BBB to rezone the sites in really close collaboration with the community. That work ended in 2012, which is when the EDC went out to public RFP for the 9 sites, and we were lucky enough to be the winners of that. So the community work didn't as we approached the project, we really started to think about both the historic context but also the current community context, and it really was all about people and creating a space for the community. As you can see, it was a whole, both programmatically and physically, that really kind of tore, split these two neighborhoods. But historically, this neighborhood is really rich. It is near the seaport. There was very rich immigrant population here, and a lot of and the Essex Market itself was at the center of that, and has been at the center of that since about 1818. It is the longest running public market in the city, and so it was a huge responsibility to create a new home for this incredible institution, but in such a way that could actually create a space that reflected the importance of the market within the community. So, one of the first things we did when we started thinking about the market and we worked with Hugh Boyd, who's a market planner on this, was meet with the vendors, talk about what their current situations were. And this is a photo of the previous market. The stalls were too small. The building was never meant to be a public market. It was originally built for push carts. And we really wanted to, and there was no place for people to sit. Like, a lot of the local community would go here to buy food and affordable fruits and vegetables. There's local vendors, but they couldn't actually stay and engage with their neighbors, or actually hang out and buy more stuff. So there wasn't really, and there also wasn't adequate trash and all the other things that come with a functioning market. So one of the concepts, and this was from the RFP phase in early design, was, can we create a market hall that really creates an aerated and open space that has place for the community to come in and not just purchase, but actually stay, that brings the energy of the street into the building and simultaneously the energy of the market to the street, and really starts to weave with the context. So this multi-layer market started to where you could have the Essex Market in the prime space, but could also start to connect the sites in different ways, which led to the idea of the market line. So the Essex Market is a public run market. The market line is run by, is privately run, but with a kind of complementary mix of vendors that connects, and you can see in this section below ground, connecting the three sites, again, as a way to weave and create a multi-level experience for retail and for the community. So this is the same photo. I love this photo because it shows the multi-level experience of the market. So this is the main entrance on the main level of the Essex Market, where you can see the vendors, but also start to see the connection and linking between the sites. But one thing that was really important too is the design was, we're New Yorkers. We like to be oriented. We don't like to get lost. And oftentimes in enclosed market spaces, you don't have that connection to the street. So the light scoop was this idea of using what was otherwise unused space underneath the movie theaters above to create that lofting vaulted ceiling towards Broome Street, to really bring light and actually an orientation, orient people to where they are in the space, which you can see here, and start to connect the different levels. It's always good to be able to see, you can see people below, see the vendors, and actually hang out in the space. So one of the concerns of the vendors themselves is they didn't want the market to be too flashy. There's a lot of markets that have been designed recently. A lot of these vendors are sole proprietors. They've been in the market for a long time. So it was really, we worked with Hugh to really just create a quiet background at the ground level so that the vendors shown. Just all of the stuff that it was one of those moments where it wasn't about being the capital A architect. This was about having kind of a subdued background so that the signs, the chocolate, the fish, all of that became what you saw and what you got excited about in the market. We're also really, the light scoop then also gave this opportunity for this great mezzanine level, which is this extra seating, a gathering space. And it was important to us that this was also visually connected to the market so that, you weren't going to another space and you could go back down and buy more food or hit get some fish on your way to the subway after you have lunch with your friends, and really start to create a space that the community can actually stay in. And also there's is a demo kitchen that is used for community meetings and cooking classes. And then the market line. So the market line opened in November of last year, the Essex Market in the spring of last year, and everything connected through that main staircase. So with that, I think I'm trying to keep to my 5 minutes. I'm really excited to be here and happy to be on the panel, and I'll turn it back to Richard.
And we'll get into a lot more detail in a moment. But first, we thought we'd show the second award-winning project, is the TWA Hotel at JFK, and this won the award for Best Adaptive Reuse this year, 2020. And you're going to hear from Richard Southwick from Byard, Dovell, who were the project and preservation architects. The jury found this really to be, I think we called it the jewel in the JFK crown. It's the only landmark building at JFK, and obviously an incredibly important and iconic one, a very famous mid-century modern building, but it's been vacant for a very long time. I think it's arguable that there are buildings that make reference airports that make references to birds in flight all over the world. This is the first one. This is the kind of mothership of airport terminals. It's iconic. It's monumental. It's also tiny, and I think that's one of the reasons that it became obsolete. But you're going to hear about, because it's more than just a hotel. I think there's a very interesting program that has all been designed around engaging with the original Aero Saarinen building with a whole new and much larger structure that still respects the landmark. So now I'd like to introduce Richard Southwick. He's going to tell us more about this project. Richard has been inspired for a long time in his practice about the time-honored qualities of historic design, materials, and craftsmanship, and he's dedicated his career to finding new life for older structures. He's really a specialist in preservation. And he's guided the revitalization of many of New York's most celebrated historic buildings and sites, and other international ones of cultural significance. So much of this work involves civic and institutional projects that provide lasting and meaningful public benefit. Over to you, Richard. Please tell us more.
Thank you, Elizabeth and MAS, for this award, and particularly for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I just want to spend a few minutes talking about a transition, the story of the adaptive reuse of a iconic but obsolete airline terminal at JFK International Airport into the new TWA Hotel. Next. Designed in the 1950s, the TWA terminal is really a symbol of post-war optimism and really an expression of the dawning jet age. Next. And equally as expressive on the inside. I always joke that there's not a square corner anywhere in this building. Floors transition into walls, transition into soffits, into ceilings. We thank God that we had BIM to model this, which was a lot easier than doing hand drafting 70 years ago. Next. So the TWA story, it opened in 1962. It became eligible and was designated New York City landmark at the 30th anniversary, or just after. But probably the big part of the story is it was only in operation for less than 40 years, and more importantly, has been vacant for almost 20 years, 2 decades prior to being opened as the TWA Hotel. It went through 2 phases of restoration. First for Port Authority and the second for MCR development. And I'll talk about a bit more of that in just a moment. Next, please. Aero Saarinen was one of the most celebrated architects of the time. And this building, which was very anticipated, was one of the most celebrated buildings of the era. Next. And unfortunately, though, Saarinen never lived to see the building opened. He died about a year before it opened in 1962. TWA was given the most prominent site at the airport. It's right on access to the entry road. And this is a new concept at the time of designing airports. Instead of the big mega terminal, LaGuardia is a local example. Tempelhof in Berlin was a contemporary example as well. This was known as Terminal City, where each of the airlines designed, built, and more importantly, paid for their own terminals, which allowed the New York Airport Commission to be able to afford just building the infrastructure and having the cost of all the terminals borne by the airlines themselves. And therefore, you really got very different looks for each of the 8 original terminals. Next. This is one of my favorite historic photographs. Is a tour de force structurally, one long, continuous 65,000 square foot thin shell concrete pour. But if you look in the background, it really identifies that this was built on the cusp of the jet age. You see a 100-passenger Lockheed Constellation prop plane on the right, and a Boeing 707, which on the right-hand side, and Connie's on the left, and they both sat about 100 passengers. And this was important for the future of this terminal. Next, please. So the building opened to great acclaim in 1962. Ezra Stoller did one of his more celebrated monographs about this building. Next. But very quickly, the very quickly growing aviation industry outgrew the building. You can see in morphology diagrams on the bottom, opened in 62. Saarinen's design was actually fully executed in 67. But by the end of that first decade, and more importantly, by the advent of wide-body jets, the Boeing 747, which would hold up to 600 passengers, you could see that this building just was too small to accommodate new aviation needs. And the building was very inflexible, a very unique sculptural form that could not be added onto with any facility. Interestingly, Saarinen worked on the Dulles Airport at the same time, which had been about 15 years ago extruded and was much more adaptable to the crowds that started to increase in the increase of aviation. So literally within 10 years, this building was obsolete. Next. And TWA went in and out of bankruptcy in the 1980s and the 1990s, and finally went out of business in 2002 in the aftermath of 9/11. It had not been well maintained over that last decade, and Byard Dovell was brought on board in the early 2000s to do a preservation plan. And then we did a first phase of restoration for the Port Authority, which essentially set the stage for adaptive reuse and redevelopment in the phase 2. You can see some of the before and afters. The curtain wall had broken glass, the sunken lounge had been modified in the 90s and never put back into its original form. And when we looked very closely at the ubiquitous half-inch square or half-inch diameter penny tile, you can see the shape of a lot of the finish throughout the building. So it was in really very poor shape. So from 2008 to about 2011, we ended up doing a major restoration of the terminal building itself. Next. At that point, the Port Authority went out and identified a designated developer. MCR Development was awarded the project. They were, in fact, actually the third developer. This was a challenging building to come up with a workable pro forma. MCR figured out the balance and the ability to put together a plan with the right number of rooms and revenue stream to both complete the restoration and do a large amount of new construction on site. The new hotel has over 500 rooms, a very large 7,000 square foot banquet hall, another ballroom, and over 45 meeting rooms. So it really is a hotel, destination hotel that happens to be at an airport other than just an airport. And interestingly, a airline terminal and a hotel lobby have very similar programs. So the adaptive use of this building was certainly easy to accomplish. They both have reception, waiting, bars, restaurants, and some back of house. So the terminal became the new hotel lobby for the TWA Hotel. Next. And the site, although quite constricted, was able to accommodate 4 buildings. The original terminal building became the lobby. There are 2 new 7-story hotel buildings fit between the JetBlue roadways and the original historic building. And there's a new 50,000 square foot underground event space, meeting rooms and conference center between the 2 tubes going down 30 feet below grade. Overall, of the approximately 120,000 square feet of the existing building, the site was expanded over 400,000 square feet of usable space. Next. The hotel buildings needed to serve 2 purposes. One, over the years, the open view to the airfield had been literally and visually cluttered by lots of new construction, JetBlue and other structures behind it. The hotels with a pale dark gray curtain wall provide a neutral background for the Saarinen sculptural form in the foreground. And they do, in fact, with the tubes, connect to the hotels and then to the JetBlue terminal behind that. Next. I'm just going to wrap this up by showing a number of photographs of the building once it opened. You see on the left-hand side the curved curtain wall, 7 layers of glass to keep the blast of a wide-body jet out of the rooms. And that follows the curve of the historic terminal. And you have views of both the runways and the historic building from the hotel rooms. Next. Here's a restored view of the expansive old terminal, now the lobby. Next. The sunken seating, which was the primary waiting area, is now a cocktail lounge, and you see a restored 1956 Lockheed Constellation in the background, which is also a cocktail lounge. Next. We restored the significant spaces within the terminal. This is the old Ambassador Club, the TWA First Class Lounge, of which Saarinen collaborated with Charles Eames, and using lots of old photographs and drawings, we were able to bring this back. Next. And there's also a lot of new construction. 30 feet underground was the pre-function space outside of the ballroom. Next. A view of the restored Connie. Next. The rooftops were utilized, one for a cogeneration plant and the other for an infinity pool that follows a curve with a great view of the bay runway. Next. And the last view, evening shot when the hotel opened in May 2019. And there you go. Back to you, Richard.
Okay. I seem to have lost my. Hang on a second. There we go. Having a little. There we go. Thank you, Richard. So it's time for a little conversation. I wanted to just point out a few things up since both of these projects are in the public realm. They both involve extensive negotiations with private and public partnerships. They both involve city agencies and state agencies and multiple layers of approvals. they both engage their communities, and they're completely different, but in very important and innovative ways, I think. And I would have to say both of these teams deserve an endurance award for achieving these projects, because they both took a really long time, because that's part of the nature of the game, I think, here in New York City. I wanted to ask you guys a little more about that. Perhaps, Dana, you could start by telling us a little more about, how you engaged with, what agencies you did engage with, and a little more history. I mean, I know that site, as long as I can remember, has been empty, has been a giant hole in the middle of our city, and now it's just so different. It's kind of, it's astonishing. So maybe you could say a little more about that.
Of course. I mean, I think it was really a really great example of a public-private partnership working really well. The EDC also runs the market, so not only were they the land owner that were doing the long-term lease to the development team, but they also were running the market. So there was, the meetings were with the development team and the market, and as we went through the design phases, and also we met frequently, and especially Hugh Boyd, who did the nuanced design of every stall, custom to every vendor, and there's almost 50 vendors in the market. So there was meetings with the vendors, and Community Board 3 was the other component that was really important. And this is in the heart of their community. It's a great opportunity to do something right in this what was a hole, and really something that was a negative, not just a zero. It was a negative, because when you don't have activation of the street, it really brings down everything around it. So it was connecting with all of those groups are really important, because ultimately this is for the community. So if it has to work for them, for the people that are on the ground every day, shopping, buying their fruits and vegetables from the local vendor who lives in the neighborhood as well. So it was really kind of a combination of all of those stakeholders. And at the end of the day, if the market is successful, it's successful for everybody. So I think everyone was on the same page. The development team wanted this to be a success, the EDC, the community. So it really made it a lot less painful than multi-stakeholder meetings can be typically, because we were all on the same page and trying.
So was it ever contentious then? Was there? I mean, I can't imagine a lot of people
always
were
like
thinking,
budget conversations that but it was productive and good, and we tried to be smart about where we did put in. Like, the big moment is the ceiling, and to be able to take the space from under the theaters and not really impact usable square footage significantly for the development was a big win. That we got the extra space, we got the extra height that you wouldn't have been able to do if it was a different program above, because it would have lowered the leasable square footage for that. So is all these kind of finding solutions creatively that really helped.
So did you develop, is that part of the master plan that you developed that? I mean, the program is really far more than a market in this whole place, right? There are movie theaters, there's apartments, there's what else is there? It's
like everything on top of each other, but that's why we love New York. That's why we live in New York. So it was, yes, the programming was a combination of the development team and us trying to figure out how to puzzle together what worked, and it came together during the RFP process, the theater, markets, and residential above, in that particular site, which is the key corner of the whole master plan.
So Richard, let's talk about TWA in the same context. I mean, I know you, obviously the Landmarks Commission was one of your major agencies you had to deal with, but also the Port Authority, right? So how did that work?
Well, literally, I've been involved with this project for 25 years. Port Authority hired Byard Linderveld as a preservation consultant as soon as it was designated New York City landmark. And that goes back to 1995. And it got complicated because the MCR, the developer, has a 75-year lease. The Port Authority only has a 50-year lease with the city. So there's a wraparound lease with the city for the last 25 years of the hotel use. We went through ULURP, we went through 4 community boards, we worked basically as a courtesy with New York City Landmarks, but more importantly, very closely with New York State Historic Preservation Office and with the National Park Service. This is a tax credit project. And probably as importantly, with at least 15 or 20 advocacy groups, both for labor, for preservation. And the fact that this building had been vacant for almost 2 decades, there's a lot of public support along all lines to try to make this happen. Port Authority did try to apply current 2014 building code regulations to this, so that was a bit of a challenge, but one we did a lot of negotiations with both the New York City Fire Department, Building Department, and Port Authority to come up with a safe and workable building. So,
I mean, I gather that my understanding, the Port Authority is kind of like a parallel universe in which they have all their own rules. So when you say the Landmarks Commission as a courtesy, they actually they are not really beholden to the Landmarks Commission in any way, right? I mean,
we certainly did present to Landmarks and Sarah Carroll at the time. They have what they consider a superior jurisdiction. Although we've done work on every historic airport that the Port Authority owns, and in a way, I call some of them born-again preservationists. They do have a greater sensitivity than you might imagine. So they were very much behind this project from day one.
So let's talk now about urban design. I mean, I think both of these have serious urban design implications. In the market, I am particularly struck by that section, which is just fabulous. And in the thought that I know New Yorkers hate to leave the street. They just want to stay on the street the whole time. So it seems to me the great success is that you were able to go down and go up and make that seem like kind of effortless. Was that hard to achieve? And it's also, maybe you could say more about the connections that it makes, because I know it makes them to subways and et cetera.
That's directly adjacent was a part of that, the unlocking of more space. So the 9 sites, there was a park as part of it, but there wasn't really like a large place that community could gather that was semi-enclosed or indoors, especially there's a lot of traffic on those streets because of the Williamsburg Bridge. So like, can we get a 2 for 1, like get more space for people and link the sites, create more program, create more activity. And you already have like the low line was also like it has the opportunity to connect to the low line if that does go through. So there's already a multi-level experience happening anyway in that part of the city. So the 3 main sites will link underneath the streets so that you'll be able to connect directly. Mm-hmm. But you can also weave up and down, and everything is orthogonal to the New York City grid. All the main circulation through the market line. So really the intent is that you can weave in, you can weave out, you can create your own path that is within the logic that we all already operate in New York. I mean, I say my pet peeve is those like drugstores where all of the aisles are on angles because you can't like navigate them logically. So we wanted to maximize the usability for the locals and that they can come in, come out, and it just works with the city. So that was really how the multi-level started happening. And then the mezzanine was this incredible opportunity. Okay, if you're going to stay for a while, it's a perch above the street. So you get the activity of the street, you can see the vendors, see your friends if they're down there buying, tamales, which is my favorite thing down in the Essex Market. But you have enough space where you can gather. And luckily that just reopened because the market has been open this whole time. But so that was the multi-level, and the key to it is that there's visual connection between everything.
Did that extra glorious space come at the expense of square footage above, or you were able to then readjust the zoning to?
It's just that we oriented the movie theater so that it's the underside of the rake of the seats.
Okay.
So that's how we were able to get the height without losing, because it is a pretty tight zoning envelope to get the base heights and in those to fit a movie theater in a market. So we were, creative solutions to get some great space.
So Richard, maybe you could say a few words about the site planning of the hotel and how that relates to the landmark building. Respect it and connect to it at the same time.
One, we wanted to go back to Saarinen original circulation scheme. There's some early concepts that had underground connections. The historic tubes are always the way to get to the plane. And it was important to connect those to JetBlue, but we wanted to use the tubes to get to the hotels. And then there's a grand stair and elevators down to the conference center. So we retain the historic circulation patterns. The hotel buildings are really quite a challenge. We were tucked very tight against the JetBlue arrival roadway on the backside and followed the curve and the limiting 30-foot setbacks from the existing building. So the hotels are really quite narrow. They're double loaded, and each of the rooms is between 5 and 10 feet shallower than a conventional hotel room to be able to make it fit within that tight sliver of an envelope. And they're a little bit wider and a little bit shallower than what you might normally get. The curve actually is really interesting because they're very long buildings, upwards to 300 feet long, and you don't see from end to end of the corridor. So it's a much nicer experience rather than this very long bowling alley.
And how does that fit into? Isn't there a larger kind of redevelopment plan for the whole airport that this is part of?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you remember the slide that showed the red arrow to TWA at the end of the axis.
Yeah.
The new JFK 2025, Cuomo's new plan, has two mega structures, two clamshells, if you will, incorporating some of the other existing buildings. TWA becomes the keystone, if you think of a very large arch, and the circulation is being altered, so the access still goes to TWA at the very end of that axis with the two large mega terminals and then the transportation center between the two. So interesting anecdote, Neil Levine, who died in 9/11, had recognized after Pan Am and some of the other buildings were going to be torn down that TWA was very important. And he'd done a tour 3 days before 9/11. It was going to be a big focused article in the Sunday Times, and he was going to underwrite the whole restoration. 9/11 happened 72 hours later. That never happened, and the whole project was delayed by about 10 or 15 years, but once again it becomes the axis or the key point and the last kind of lodestone of the original JFK terminal city.
So one thing I'm sure is on everybody's minds is how this has changed since the advent of the pandemic. And I'm wondering if either one of you wants to tell us. I mean, I'm sure the market is, I guess, considered an essential business, right? So it's been open the whole time.
Yes. Yeah, the market has been open the whole time, the Essex Market. So that's been running. All the vendors are still there to my knowledge. I was just there 2 weeks ago, and it was really exciting to be there and bought a lot of food. But yeah, the market's been running. The market line is just reopening and starting to do the sidewalks seating, so people have space outside and they don't have to use the inside. And otherwise, people are practicing, the best COVID practices, spacing, masks, all of the that. So it seems like it's as okay as can be given the situation.
And at the hotel?
At TWA, hospitality was probably a little less essential, and the whole industry took a real beating in the very beginning. Occupancy really dropped off. The hotel never closed. And within a few months, as travel started to pick up, the owner worked out a deal with a lot of the flight crews who normally would have bussed into Manhattan, spent the night in the layovers in Manhattan, going back out again. So a lot of their business was picking up the flight crew occupancy. Things are coming back. They're following all the safe deep cleaning of each room, limited elevator occupancy, and all that. And they're also marketing, because people aren't traveling as much, a staycation. And if you can't go to the airport and fly to Paris, you can go to the airport and use that wonderful pool or go to the fitness club. There really are a couple of wonderful restaurants that have just opened up. And
So people are doing that?
people have been doing that. It's a, I hate to use the term throwback, but it's this wonderful environment, wonderful atmosphere. You see, it's a great soundtrack. You see people smiling and kind of dancing through the place from day one, and it's a great escape. So a lot of times I spend a lot of time there, usually late night punch listing and spending a night in the hotel. But you run into people, you talk to them in the lounge, and they're coming in from Morristown or from Forest Hills or wherever, and they're spending time there. So that has been a big part of the business, because you don't have that many 7 o'clock a.m. flights that people are getting there early for. So,
But not the original intended one, though, I suppose, right?
Yeah, the occupancy's it's worked its way up much more than one might expect.
Do either of you have any idea, like, what percentage of tourists you get versus neighborhood versus locals, like like in the market, for example? I mean, I'm wondering if that COVID, but
Yeah, I don't know those numbers, but I know that the market is, the majority is local, local people, and especially now, if there's going to be office coming online as part of the master plan, which will bring even more people to the neighborhood. So the focus during the design was the local and the New Yorker neighborhood, and then I think people do visit it when they go to the Lower East Side, and that's an exciting additional person that the market was really focused on the local.
Yeah, at TWA, I'm not sure I can give you a percentage, but it's always been marketed as a regional destination as well. At the very least, there's a very large health club. There's a food court of local food truck vendors, and the bars and restaurants attract people, as well as a 250-person ballroom for weddings and other types of events. So there's a big regional draw, because there's a lot of population in that area.
one last question, and I want to open it up to our audience for questions. We've talked a lot about kind of macro scale stuff. I want to talk about micro scale stuff and think about materials, in particular in the market. I think we are all struck by the use of materials and how they resonate with the neighborhood and with the history of that. Can you say more about that?
Let me make sure I'm going to be, yeah, sure. The materials were an important part of the master plan and to the community board as well, that the buildings, both interior, like exterior in the market, interior, had a scale and a texture. It was not kind of a glass box being thrown into the center of the Lower East Side. So, and the other piece of that was also that no contiguous buildings had the same material or the same architect. So there was variation built in to the master plan. The market itself, the main thing was the main design element in the ceiling was influenced a lot by actually the subway's vaulting and Guastavino and the texture, but reinterpreting it in a new way to get that lightness, that really lightness and a warmth to the space that was really inviting, that you could see from the exterior and that you really experience when you're there. So that was the influence, is that next grain of texture you get. And like some of the older subways use a really beautiful, even concrete vaulting, and obviously Guastavino's the more elaborate version of that. But with technology today, it's all GFRG, so glass fiber reinforced gypsum. So there's two standardized molds that were made And the ceiling is essentially a gypsum panelized ceiling that pops in, not unlike ACT, just a very nice version of it. And then everything else is meant to be industrial and
Interesting.
Back.
Yeah.
First came out.
Yeah,
And at
and TWA,
the hotel, Richard?
it's a bit of a cliche in preservation, but all the new work had the elegance, kind of simplicity and richness of a modernist palette, but they certainly were contemporary materials. So you can certainly discern what was new compared to what was restored. And we try to have that philosophy carry through.
Okay, so MAS, do we have any questions from our audience? Anyone want to ask a question?
Have one for Richard Southwick. Can you touch upon whether you found the TWA space difficult to reinvigorate with a new program? The question stems from how architects should balance designing aesthetically pleasing buildings while also making the space functional for years to come. Having been part of the preservation effort, what lessons do you have for architects when designing long-lasting buildings?
First of all, the adaptability of the airline terminal and a hotel lobby are pretty similar. You check in, whether you're getting a room or a plane ticket, you drop your bags off, you go grab a drink, you wait for a friend, and then you go on to either the plane or the hotel. We were fortunate that it's a very spacious building, and there's a lot of back of house and a lot of room for food and beverage. The lesson, I think, for materials is whether it's new construction or historic, it's the quality of the materials and quality of construction. It was difficult to find the right craftsmen, but when we did the tile work, we found an itinerant Greek tile group out of Miami that would travel around the world, and they had to be basically certified for different types of fairly sophisticated repairs. So the tile work itself took about 1.5 years, and but it's held up very well over the last 8 or 9 years since the first phase.
Were there particular projects that served as a precedent or inspiration for either one?
Dana, do you want to grab that first?
I think we kind of just touched on it on a couple, but we did study them. There's a lot of historic market halls around the world that we looked at in terms of how they serve their communities, especially there's the historic ones in Europe, also in other parts of the States. So we did a lot of digging there. And then also just with the idea of the kind of multi-layered New York experience, that's where some of the idea of the vaulting from the subways and the historic Guastavino spaces at Grand Central, like that, those were really big influences for the market. But yeah.
Yeah, we looked at hotels, a number of hotels around the country. And I want to acknowledge Librano Chiavera Architects, who was actually the concept designer for the hotel work. We went to JetBlue's training hotel in Florida. We looked at the back of house of lots of hotels. And then with Cerami Acoustics, we looked at hotels on runways and on taxiways, because we're so close to these A380s. We developed a very, very special glass assembly, 7 layers, 5 inches thick. And
Wow.
It had to be designed not only for the rumble of a 380 Airbus taking off, which is very low, but those squeaky brakes of the delivery trucks in the morning. So that was a major part of the work, coming up with this very extensive and very heavy curtain wall.
How produce is brought in and out of the Essex Market without disturbing the community?
Which is great. That was one of the things that the old market did not have. It didn't have loading access. Obviously, it's a really complex market. Like I just mentioned, some of the ones historically in Europe, a lot of those aren't in a bigger building. They're freestanding and they have access on all sides. So the circulation was really kind of a puzzle here. And there is a double loading dock that serves the market, and then there's storage on the lower level below the market line in the basement for the vendors. So they all have varying degrees of storage space, including cold storage, so that they have their produce on site. There's also like upgraded, trash facilities, and the things have to get out too. So that's all within the loading dock to minimize trucks and trash and et cetera on the streets.
Yeah, Dana, the developer of TWA did something very different, very unique. All the loading goes to another building because you would get small panel trucks and larger trucks 24 hours a day. So everything goes to one of the baggage handling buildings, and then they shuttle things, and it could be lettuce and laundry at the same time, and they come, and it cuts down the truck traffic on airline access roads by probably 90%.
Wow.
A very
amazing.
Very clever idea.
Yeah, I wish we could have done something like that. There wasn't really there's no like back door in the whole master plan to be able to shuttle things underneath. But
yeah, we had to do a complete back of house circulation. There's a public loop and a back loop, kind of like in a hospital, the dirty and clean corridors, or in a prison. So nothing crosses over, and that was a very tricky thing to plan early on.
that would be a fun tour.
Yeah, it is.
Totally. We have time for one more question. Do we have one?
There's a question about if you can hear the jet planes, which I think that Richard has indicated we cannot. But if you want to elaborate further on the 5 inches of glass, go ahead.
The 5 inches of glass is 2 double panes, 1 triple pane, with 2 varying airspaces in between. And
Wow.
It can go from probably 120 decibels down to, I don't know, probably about 40 decibels or so. And it's quiet enough. The only thing you hear in the hotel room if you sleep there is the fan coil unit.
Okay. Okay. Thank you both very much. That was really, really interesting and wonderful stuff. Great projects. Congratulations to both of you.
Well, thank you, sir.
I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth now, I think. Elizabeth?
Congratulations to all of our award winners, past and especially present. These are extraordinary projects, and I think even for those of us who haven't gotten to see them in person yet, they are just exciting additions to New York City life, and we're all raring to go after tonight and hearing from all of you. And tours is a really good idea. What fun to be able to see the back of house in either of these places and understand the complexities of these things that look easy when you're in them, but are much more complicated both to design as well as to actually operate. I again want to congratulate you on great projects. If you know of any great programs that are likely to fit and might be a great Masterworks Award winner in the future, we urge you to nominate them for future awards. They'll be our awards will be open in the middle of 2021. So please keep your eyes open and subscribe to our mailing list to stay in touch with those. I want to thank all of my colleagues at MAS who do an extraordinary job of producing these programs. You know who you are. These are always seamless, and you all deserve enormous congratulations of a special kind when each one of these comes off without a hitch. I also hope that all of you who joined us tonight are members of MAS, but if you're not, we hope you will consider joining. Your membership dollars help us to continue to do this kind of programming, as well as all of our policy and advocacy work. It's incredibly vital to have your support. We hope that you will join us again for other MAS events, upcoming ones, virtual tours or MAS programs, and you can view our schedule by going online to mas.org/events. Thank you again for joining us for this fun evening, and we hope to see you again next time.